Hi everyone, thanks for checking back into another episode of Stats All Day with Dr. O'Day. Today we're going to be talking about how to create a study on Qualtrics, because this is something that oftentimes my students need to learn how to do in order to run their study. Now, before I get started, I want to talk about what Qualtrics is and what it is not. So Qualtrics is an online survey repository. This is where you will actually create your survey or your study, and this is where participants will actually complete it. This is not, though, where you recruit your participants. I think that Qualtrics does have the option to use their software to recruit participants. Most social science researchers do not do that. Most of us will use things like Prolific, Cloud Research, MTurk, Cloud Research Connect, or some other form of survey recruitment. This is just where participants are filling out the survey. This is where they're completing those skills. So here we can see that the way that you navigate to Qualtrics and the way that you find this is usually you go to your university's Qualtrics. So most people are going to be affiliated with a university when they're doing this. So we would go, if you were me, you'd go to butler.qualtrics.com. Then you could access it. Other people might be at a different institution. When you first get there, if you've never been on Qualtrics before, you're going to have to log in, and it's going to be blank. There's going to be nothing here. Now, I've run a few hundred studies at this point, so there's quite a bit going to be in my Qualtrics. It's actually easier to see all of your projects once you have quite a few by clicking See All Projects, but if this is just your first one, you don't need to worry about that. So down here in the lower left, they kind of hide this button, but down here in the lower left is create a new project. So we're going to go ahead and click on that. And they have some default stuff. I always just click survey. So I'm going to create a new survey. And they kind of bump you all around. The Qualtrics navigation is not the best. What I would suggest is to figure out the navigation, just spend an hour or two clicking around Qualtrics. I'm going to show you some of the quick things today. I will say the software is not the most user-friendly in the world, though it does work really well. And once you get used to it, once you spend an hour or two clicking around, you'll be able to do everything pretty easily. So down here in the bottom right-hand corner, it says Get Started. So we're going to go ahead and click that. And I'm just going to call this Test. So this is just a test. You can put it into an existing folder if you want, but if this is your first project, you don't really need to worry about that too much. You can copy from existing surveys or existing studies. That's a great way to start. Just a lot of times I'll do that just so that a lot of the stuff is already done. Like I ask very similar demographic questions. That'd be things like age, gender, sexual orientation across all of my studies, and so I can just kind of copy and start from there. That being said, today we're going to start with a brand new project. So to orient you a little bit to how Qualtrics is going to work, it's organized in blocks. So I can add a block, I can add another block, I can add another block, and each of these blocks, the way that it sets the survey up by default, is that these blocks will be on different pages of your survey. Now, one thing that you can do is in your study or within a block, you can add a page break, and every so often I'll do that, but I will warn you, when you do those within block page breaks, sometimes they don't work very well. There is some glitching that happens with those surveys, and it kind of overrides some of your randomization. So I would caution you against using very many of those within block page breaks. Instead, I much prefer to just put, if I want it to be on a separate page of the study, I put it in a separate block. So that's just my preference. You can figure out what works for you. Now the first block here is always going to be informed consent. So whenever a participant participates in my study, they've got to complete an informed consent, and that means indicating that yes, they would like to participate in this study and that they understand what they have just read. Now, if you're someone who's brand new to creating a study, you'll need to go on your university or your college's IRB website, the Institutional Review Board website, and you can download a template for the informed consent. So if I was going to do this myself, I might say Butler University And you'll see there I've already typed informed consent, but probably what you should type in is IRB, Butler University IRB, and that's right there. So you can just go on that website, and if you look here, Butler University has informed consent form templates, and so you could just fill that out. Now, once you've filled that out, you can copy that form into your study. So let me just click here and act like I've done this. I could download that file and we could open that up, and you can see here there's just a number of things that you would fill out. So let's pretend that I'm just going to copy a small section here. You would create this informed consent for whatever your study is, but I'm just going to copy a small section of that, and we'll put this in here, and that represents the full informed consent. Now, informed consents are meant to be signed, but because this is an online study, they can't really sign as you would see here. So you would kind of take out the I, insert the name there, language, and instead you would just say, do you consent to the above? And the first answer here would be yes. Second answer, whoa, one thing that Qualtrics does is it auto-populates some of this stuff. Sometimes that helps, a lot of times it doesn't. It's kind of annoying that it does that by default. So here, yes, maybe, and no, maybe is not an answer here. Either they consent or they don't. So we've got to figure out a way to get rid of that. There's a couple of ways. So one, we could click this drop down and hit remove choice. We could also just subtract off here on the left side the number of choices, and you'll see one nice thing is that if I click it back to 2, it deletes maybe and leaves yes and no. So do you consent? They have to check that. Now, what happens if a participant clicks ahead in your survey without clicking that? Are you going to allow them to do that? Well, hopefully not, because they need to consent to participate in your study. So what I would do here is, because I need them to answer this before moving on, I would go down here to the bottom left, and where it says add requirements, I would force a response. So in order to move on in the study, they would have to answer this particular item, and it won't let them advance in the study until they've done so. On other pages, if you weren't as interested in knowing, yes, absolutely, they have answered this question, and you just, ideally they answer the question, but if it's not a big deal if they skip it, and you should allow your participants to skip. That's part of informed consent. If they don't feel comfortable answering a question, they should be able to skip. And so on a different block, I could just request response. And what that would do is, if they, for whatever reason missed that question and then they clicked next, it would say, whoa, hold up. Do you really want to advance, or would you like to answer this question that you missed? And it would allow them to advance. And I would argue that you should allow your participants to advance on any other page of the survey. Here, though, we're going to leave it as forced response because they have to consent in order to participate. So now, once they move on, oftentimes the second block is going to be demographics. So now you'll notice there wasn't by default just a question already in there. Well, we can click add new question, and now is where it starts to be a choose your own adventure in how you're going to create this study. Let's say that I'm starting with age. Well, do I give them multiple choice on age? No, I let them type in their age. And so you could do a slider, I suppose, where you allowed them, from 0 to 100 to slide to their age, but that's awkward, that's cumbersome. We don't want to do that. So instead, we can leave this question here, but we can go up here to the top left. And if you don't like the way that the question ends up looking, just try something else. I'm going to try text entry. Here, I can say, what is your age? Bam, now they're able to type in their age. All right, let's move on. What if I was asking about gender? So I could do add new question. Now we typically want them to be able to make a choice here. So I could do multiple choice, and I could say, what is your gender? And I could say, and by default, it populates it with sex instead of gender. That's not a great thing that Qualtrics is going to do here. So I'm just going to, fill this in myself. I would say cisgender man, cisgender woman, And then I could say transgender man, transgender woman. And you'll see here I've now ran out of choices. So what I need to do again is just go to the left side here and add a few more here. And what I could add is non-binary or gender fluid. And now at this point, I mean, it's up to you how exactly you're going to measure gender. There's going to be best practices in the field. To be honest, the best way to do it would just be to say, what is your gender, and let them type it in like we did with age. The reason that most researchers are not going to do it that way is because then they would have to go and actually read through each of those responses and code them, which takes, a fair amount of time when there's 300 participants. That would be the most inclusive way to do this, and I'm not saying that you should not do it that way. It's just that does get a little bit cumbersome to do that. What I prefer is adding, the categories that I've added here, but then also allowing participants to report their gender. And a lot of times people would say other here. I prefer not to say other because that indicates that, it could indicate negativity about them not matching up with the genders that we've listed here. Instead, I prefer something like my gender is not listed, please indicate. Now you might say, how the heck are they going to indicate? That's just a checkbox. Well, you can hit this little drop down and say allow text entry. So now we're saying my gender is not listed, please indicate, and they are then able to do that. And then you could also say prefer not to disclose. So now if they would prefer not to answer, they can always check that box as well. I don't always include that option because they could, like I said, I don't force them to answer this question anyways. So a lot of times I'll just take that off, and if they don't answer it, I assume that they prefer not to disclose. So you can create all of your demographics in similar ways like that. Now, a lot of my students, as they move from demographics into the study, let's say that I was using a scale here, because a lot of my students are going to be using scales, like Likert type scales, where you've got multiple items. And there's a couple ways that you could do that. But let's say I'm measuring social dominance orientation. So this is a scale that is a pretty popular scale in the area of prejudice literature. It's the extent to which people believe that hierarchy in society is important, and they value status differences between people of other groups. So like I said, there's multiple ways that you can do this. No one says that you have to do your study exactly like I have. That being said, I've made a lot of surveys. I suggest doing something fairly close to this. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to do add new question. And you can do this in one of two ways. You could do a multiple choice where you put each of your items as separate questions. So like item 1, I believe that some groups are simply inferior to other groups. I believe that this is something very similar to the first item in that scale. So now we just need to fill this out. We could say 1, strongly disagree. 2, 3. You'll see here I want to add a few more. I prefer a 7-point Likert scale for something like this. You could add neutral in the middle here. 4 neutral, 7 strongly agree. So you could certainly do it like this. One thing that I will say, it's a little bit odd to answer a Likert type scale in vertical format. So you can actually go over here on the left to alignment, and you can change this to horizontal. And now it looks a little bit better. One thing that I learned here recently is actually you can add these scale anchors above. You can click the drop down arrow here and do rich content editor. And you can do it like this. And in fact, I wouldn't put it in parentheses at this point. I would just say strongly disagree. And this is going to look pretty good. That looks a little bit better than putting it right next to it. So again, what I did was I just copied this information right here. I did rich content editor. I had never considered using rich content editor here, but one of my students realized that you could do this and then you could pop those above instead of putting them next to it, and that just makes it look a little bit cleaner there. So I highly suggest that you do that if you're going to create scales like this. Okay, so now let's talk about matrix tables. Another way that you could make this same item, and actually it's a better way when you have multiple items, is we'll go to add new question and we'll do matrix table. And here you just say, please answer the following items using the scale provided. Now you can put multiple items in each one of these. So like 1, I believe some groups are simply inferior to other groups. And then we could say 1, strongly disagree. 2, 3, we add scale points up to 7, and we're going to say strongly agree. Okay, so that's how we could do this, and then you just write the second item, you write the third item, you write the fourth item. So this is how you create Likert type scales. You can add items too, just on the left side here. The number of statements. If you had a 10 item scale, you could do 10 items there. If you had a 20 item scale, you could do that, and you just write all of the items here. Participants are able to answer on a 1 strongly disagree to strongly agree scale. The other thing you can do is you can add in videos, you can add in pictures, you can add links. I mean, you can do about anything with Qualtrics survey software. You can even take it one step further, and you can actually code you can actually engage in computer programming to program in things that Qualtrics doesn't allow you to do by default. And then, of course, the last thing here, I would have the debriefing form, and you would copy in a debriefing statement, thank your participants, explain the study, and then you would potentially redirect them to Cloud Research or MTurk or however you recruited them so that they can get paid out. So if you do have any other questions, if you want me to make a potential help video on anything else here, let me know. Otherwise, have a great rest of your day, and thanks for checking back in. Make sure to hit that like and subscribe, and let me know if there's any videos that you'd like to see coming up.